Hello everybody. I thought today we could make a cheesecake, and specifically we're going to make my pumpkin cheesecake today because it's fall and pumpkin is everywhere and it's one of my favorites. So let's go ahead and get started. I do this in phases, I guess you could say. The first thing I do is I prepare my pan, and so what I have here is a 7 by 3-inch Fat Daddy-O's anodized aluminum push pan. I know that's a mouthful. It's a push pan because the bottom comes out, and when your cheesecake is done, you can set this on a big can or something and just push it, and then the cheesecake will rise up out of the pan. If you want to use a springform pan, you're more than welcome to. I had a bad experience once and ended up with, coincidentally, a pumpkin cheesecake on my shoes. That was a long time ago, before I knew what I was doing. But when I discovered these, that was it. And they come in 7-inch and 6-inch and some other sizes, and I just really like it. So what I've done is I've sprayed the pan, and I just use the spray that's for baking. And then what I have here, since I have a 7-inch pan, I also have a 7-inch piece of round parchment paper. You can buy these pre-made, or you can just trace the little disc, and there you go, cut it out. So I sprayed the pan, and then I'm putting this on top of it, okay? But then I'm also going to spray it. Just give it a spray. And now I've prepared my pan, and we'll move on to the next step. The next step that I like to do is to just get the pressure cooker prepared and ready to go. So when I do that, I just make sure that I have a sealing ring that I use for my sweet foods. Even though we wrap the cheesecake, I don't really want to take a chance that it's going to taste like curry or something like that. So I have rings for sweet, and then I have rings for savory. So I've got that. I always make sure that the liner is in there, because if you've ever poured water directly into your pot without the liner, it's a pain to clean and dry and do all that. So liner's in, and I go ahead and I put the water in. So we'll be putting 1.5 cups of water in there. And then also I make sure that my trivet is in there and ready to go. And I just use the trivet, or some people call this a rack, I guess, that came with the pot. So I just set it down in there, and then I'm actually going to fold the handles in, because I myself don't like to use the handles to get the cheesecake in and out. I use a sling, which is going to be our next step. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so I like to get my sling prepared if I don't already have one. You may only have to do this one time, and then after you have a sling made, it usually lasts for a pretty long time. This particular one is kind of very well used. There's kind of stuff on it and everything, but it works. So what I did is I just pulled out a 28-inch length of aluminum foil out of the package. You could probably get away with 26, 25, whatever. I just eyeballed it, and then when I measured it, it's like, oh, okay, this one's 28 inches. That's what I use. And then what I do is I fold it 3 times. I fold it towards the middle, and then on this side, I fold it towards the middle. Okay, so that, and then I fold the whole thing over one time. This gives it more strength. I mean, you don't want a weak sling when you're pulling something hot out of your Instant Pot, that's for sure. Okay, and then when you go to use it, you'll have the pan sitting on there, and I'll show you this, and kind of like a little stork with your little package. Okay, so that's the sling. Now we're going to prepare our crust, and what I have here in my little chopper are 8 graham crackers that I just broke up and stuck in there. And you can use a regular food processor for this. If I didn't have this little chopper, you can see over here I've got my regular big food processor, which is what I am going to use later on. But I would just make the crust in this, wipe it out, and then make the filling. So you don't have to have both. I just got a really good deal on this one at the secondhand store, so hey, couldn't beat it. Okay, so to the graham crackers, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of sugar because graham crackers aren't really sweet, and that little bit of sweetness really is nice in a cheesecake. I apologize for my camera work. I'm doing this with one hand and my phone, so I'm not fancy. Okay, then the other thing is I like to put a good 1/4 teaspoon of some ground ginger in there. It just adds a nice little bit of spice that complements the pumpkin cheesecake. And then I also do a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. Now, I've heard some people when they do these cheesecakes that they actually use like cinnamon graham crackers, which I've actually never tried in this. So that could be very interesting. Some people use different kinds of cookies, you know, maybe shortbread or something like that. So you can really get creative with this part. Oh, another one I heard of is ginger snaps. And I guess maybe, you know, if you don't want to do the graham cracker thing, that would be a good option for you. So, you know, you can have some fun with this. All right, so I'm going to process these until they're very fine crumbs. So as you can see, these are nice fine crumbs, and now we need something to bind those into a crust. So I have 2½ tablespoons of melted butter, and I'm just gonna pour that in there. And then I'm going to process it again just to make sure that all the crumbs get nice and moistened. And sometimes you have to get in there with your rubber spatula and give it a manual stir just to make sure everything is all consistent. Okay? So those came together nicely. And now I'm just going to dump this into my prepared pan. And then we're going to get the rest in there. There we go. Now at this point you can use your fingers and press it in the bottom, or you can use a little glass, and I have a little glass that I like to use, so I'm going to do that. Okay, I have the crusts all pressed in there now, and you don't have to come all the way up the sides. You just come up about 1 inch or so, and gives that filling a little bit of something to sit in the back end there. And at this point, what we want to do is put this in the freezer, and this will be freezing while we're doing the next steps. And then when we take it out of the freezer, what you'll notice is that this will be nice and hard, and it won't be crumbly, so it'll hold together really well. The filling starts with 2 8-ounce bricks of cream cheese at room temperature. So some of the ingredients that you're going to want to have at room temperature when you make this cheesecake is obviously this cream cheese, and there's going to be some heavy cream, eggs, and this one has pumpkin puree. And if you make your own pumpkin puree like I do and keep it in the fridge, then you'll want to take it out and let it start warming up. And if you just use the pumpkin puree, and use pure pumpkin puree, don't use pumpkin pie filling. There's a big difference. And if you're just getting it from the can, then chances are it's already room temperature, so no big deal. Then we just start doing the filling. And one reason why you want all of your ingredients at room temperature is because it makes everything, if it's cold, if you have this at room temperature and then you put something really cold in there, it's going to make it lumpy because it starts to firm up again, you know, with the cold temperature. So the other thing that I put in right away is a 1/2 cup of sugar. Now I'll say this is not a very sweet cheesecake. To me it's just right. I don't like really, really sweet things once in a while. But if you decide that you want it a little bit sweeter, I would try a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and that kind of adds a little sweetness. It's not too much, but it also gives it just a little different flavor, you know, with the molasses and the brown sugar kind of make it a little richer. So that's an option for you. And so I would also, if you're going to use the brown sugar, put that in at this point as well. So now I'm just going to process this and make this mixture all nice and creamy. Okay, you can see how perfectly creamy that is, and we'll go ahead from there and add the rest of our lovely ingredients. A few spices in here. This isn't going to really be like a pumpkin spice cheesecake, but you have to have some. And the recipe for this is on my website, and I'll provide a link to that. But just to break it down really quick, because I was asked to say what ingredients I'm using instead of just throwing them in here. So we have 3/4 of a teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice, 3/4 of a teaspoon of allspice, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger, and a 1/2 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. To me, that just made a nice blend. The other thing is I'm doing 2 teaspoons of all-purpose flour. Now, if you're gluten-free, maybe you could use some tapioca, or if you have something that you normally would use as a thickening agent, go ahead and switch out the flour for that. I've only ever used flour, but I have heard of people using, I think it was tapioca. I'm not sure about arrowroot. I'm not really familiar with that, but I'm trying to give you an option. So the reason we do that is because the pumpkin puree has a bit of water in it, and with the cream, it's going to be a very creamy cheesecake, but I like it to hold together a little bit better. Okay, and speaking of the cream, again, at room temperature, this is a 1/2 cup. Just right on in there. And this one I'm definitely going to need 2 hands for, but I'm going to show you. This is the pumpkin puree. And mine is very bright orange because, like I said, this is a homemade version. And you can make this pumpkin puree in your Instant Pot. I have a link on my website for that, but you could also make it in the oven, just bake it, and you can also make it in a crock pot. So it's really wonderful. You'll want to make sure you get baking pumpkins. Sometimes they call them pie pumpkins, sugar pie, fairy tale, Cinderella, haha. Anyway, there's a bunch of different ones. So don't use the jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. Those are stringy and watery and just not good. These are sweet and nice. Okay, so I'll be putting that pumpkin puree in just a second, but I also want to put in 2 teaspoons of vanilla. And I like to use, again, homemade vanilla. I didn't make my vanilla in the Instant Pot, even though you can. I actually did this last year and just soaked the beans in vodka. So I'll go ahead and get the pumpkin puree in there and we'll move on. So at this point, you can process this pretty much as you want. You'll just want to get in there and scrape down the edges, and you can see there's a lot of cream cheese that sticks. Once we get the eggs in, though, you will not want to process it that much, but I'll go over that in a moment. But for right now, go ahead and get this really well mixed and really creamy. And that'll also help the spices to start absorbing the moisture, and then they can start blooming and, you know, really adding their flavor to the mixture. Okay, so it's also at this point that you can taste it because there's no raw eggs in it yet. Hey, you got to make sure it's going to be good, and it is. It's really good. I already made one of these, actually 2 of these in the last couple of weeks. I had to send one with my husband to work because when they're here, we'll just eat them. I mean, that's what they're for, but anyway. Okay, so now the very last thing you do with the filling as far as ingredients go is you're going to want to add your eggs. And I use 3 eggs. We have chickens. They're getting older though, so they don't lay as often, but you see those bright orange yolks. You don't really get those in the store-bought ones as much, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Just 3 eggs. And then go ahead. Now at this point, and pardon the noise because I'm going to actually work this thing, but I want to show you exactly how much I actually blend it. Okay, so you can see in there, and I'm just going to use my pulse here. And then I'm going to look in there and just see if I can visibly see any yolk. Okay, and I don't. So that's it. That is all I do for the egg with the food processor. And so now what I'll do is I'll just get in here, you know, with my spatula, and I'll just make sure it's all mixed, and I do it by hand. And the reason why is because if you were to give those eggs a full-on process and really, you know, fluff them up. It's just like when you're making meringue or something, or a souffle, you know, you get a lot of air into those eggs, and then those eggs are going to end up poofing up in your cheesecake. And for this cheesecake, that's not what you want. You know, want it to be denser, and so it'll be denser if you don't overmix the eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that by hand real quick, and then we'll move forward. Okay, so now is the time to get your crust out of the freezer, and you can see it's nice and cold, and this really got nice and solid, so it's all ready to go. And then we're just going to pour the filling on into the crust, and then we'll go on from there. Okay, it fit in there just perfectly. You want to have just a little bit of room, because when this cooks, it does puff up a little bit. And even this much, it's possible that it'll puff up and touch the cover that I'm going to put on it, but it'll sink back down as it cools. So it's not that big of a deal. But you can see how loose this is. Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff in there, obviously. I don't know if I mentioned that with the pumpkin puree, that was 1 cup. I'm sorry if I didn't say that. Okay, so now what we want to do, because we don't want a bunch of water to get in there, we need to cover this. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is get a paper towel. We have those ones where you can cut off like a half of a towel, so I had to use 2 pieces. And you just want to kind of roughly make it just so it'll go over. Okay, and then what you're going to do on top of that is you're going to take a piece of aluminum foil and just put it on top. And then what we'll end up doing is, this pan has a little lip on it down there, and so you can see there. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to crimp it under there really good, and then just all the way around. So I need 2 hands for that, so I'll go do that. Okay, so it was centered on the sling after we got it all wrapped up nice and tight. And then just bring up the 2 ends, and then like a little stork package, you just want to put it right inside the pot, and then just let the ends of the sling just lay there. That's fine. And then put your lid on, obviously set the knob to the sealing position, and then you might have on your display a manual button, or you might have one that says pressure cook, or the new ones have the dial. However you set a manual time. And then we're going to set it for 50 minutes, and then we're going to do about a 20-minute natural release. And I'll see you when that's done. I hope you can hear me. The neighbors next door have a jackhammer going. So I apologize for that. Anyway, so this has been naturally releasing for about 20 minutes, and it looks like the pin is already down. So just in case, I still do the knob just kind of to make it a habit. And just set the lid like that. Now these usually aren't too terribly hot, but just in case, what I usually do is just kind of bring them up like this and just let them kind of sit there for a second and cool down, and then we'll take the pot out, or take the pan out of the pot. So these have cooled down enough, and a lot of times too there's water that pools on here, so just be really careful that it doesn't, you know, spill on you or on somebody. And then just, I don't have stone countertops, so I'm just going to set it on this rack. Okay, and then I leave it covered because I like it to cool down a little bit slower, so just for a few minutes, and then we'll come and take a look. Okay, the jackhammer finally stopped for a while at least. So let's take a look at what we've got. Just be really careful. Obviously there's going to be some steam in there probably, depending on how long you leave it. And I try to be really careful when I open it, because just in case if I have to put it back in for a few minutes, I want to be able to get this back on. It usually rips though. Okay, and don't be alarmed if it sticks a little bit. Well, this one didn't, but it's got a little thing there. So what happens is sometimes it will it'll poof up in the pan and then it will stick and then it'll come back down. Anyway, see, this is just a little bit jiggly, but it's not making waves or anything, which means that it's perfect. Look at the spices, you can see them in there, and it smells really good. So I'm going to let it sit like this for about an hour or so, just until it's cool enough to actually put in the fridge. And I'm going to put it in the fridge in the pan. Hopefully you get a smoother result than I did. I usually do, but yeah, you know, sometimes they crack. And from what I've been told, that they usually, cheesecakes crack because they cool down too quickly. I don't know. I don't care. It still tastes good, and I'm going to probably put stuff on top of it so nobody will see it. Okay, well, I'm going to let this cool and then put this in the fridge, and then I'll see you later for the big reveal. And the jackhammer has started up again, so this is a good time. See you in a bit. Okay, so you can tell by the shadows it's a lot later in the day, and even though it hasn't been chilling quite as long as I would like it to, I think it's good enough to go ahead and take out of the pan. If not, I guess we'll find out. But I don't want to wait any longer. It's going to be too dark to video pretty soon. So I just get one of the larger size cans, so this is bigger than a soup can. And then I just try to center it over. And let's see if I can do this with one hand. Aha. And just push it off. There. And then there you have a lovely cheesecake. And my terrible camera work, sorry about that. And then now what you can do is you can slide maybe an offset spatula under there and lift it out onto a plate. And then to hide any cracks or anything that you get, just, you know, either live with it or just decorate it. What I like to do is make a ganache with butterscotch, and then another ganache with chocolate, and then just kind of drizzle it over the top. That's kind of my new thing. I love the taste of butterscotch on a cheesecake. It's really good. And of course chocolate. And I should specify butterscotch on a pumpkin cheesecake is really good. So I know this is kind of a long video, and there's a lot of construction going on in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. But I appreciate if you stuck with me this far. I just really wanted to show you guys how to do it, especially for the new folks who really want to tackle a cheesecake, and they kind of get it in theory, but for the visual learners especially, it really helps to just see somebody do it. And, you know, like I said, if your results aren't perfect, so what? It's going to taste awesome. Okay, well, have a good day, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.